Okay, so we're going to start off from the rear view of the equipment. This is the Disruptor 16. This is what it looks like from behind when all the parts are correctly assembled. We have here is the extraction chamber itself. Up on top here we have the extractor insert. This is the supply line over here, and it runs down over to here and goes to this gauge and this valve. This will be connected to the supply tank. So the CO2 will go in here, go through this column, which is where your raw material goes. It will come out this valve down here at the bottom. Saturated CO2 will run up this tube and hit the solenoid valve. The solenoid valve is controlled by this timer down here, and it pulses on and off. It releases small amounts of saturated CO2 into this collection column here. We can see there's a heater on the bottom of this down here. And actually, you can also see that there is a relief valve right down here. This is so you can collect extract along the way without having to depressurize the entire system. So again, we have a relief valve here. We have the collector heater here to keep it from freezing up. We have the collection chamber. Once the CO2 comes in here, it drops its extract load in here, which goes to the bottom of the chamber. The CO2 then comes up through here, past this valve. This is a pressure gauge, which you'll see from the front momentarily. There's a pressure release valve here. The CO2 goes out this line, it's over here. It runs around, it comes back in here, and this is collected to a recapture tank that is sitting in the freezer over there. The black O-ring that's on the top of the insert here, that is going to seat down inside this channel right in here, all around here. That's the O-ring seat area. This needs to be lubricated. I use jojoba oil as the lubricant, as natural lubricant. So you can see the O-ring there. You can see as it sits in here like this. You can still see the top of the O-ring, and you can see this gap that's right here. That gap is no good. You have to push this down, this whole insert down inside, so there is no gap here. Before you put the retaining ring on here, you have to push this down so there is no gap here. The first few times that you do this, it will be very difficult to do, and you'll have to push down on it very, very hard. Once you have that insert fully seated into the top of the extractor, then you can screw the retaining ring on. And this retaining ring does not require a really hard tighten situation. It can be done just like that. See that? That's hard enough. You don't need to be any tighter than that, because all this does is hold this insert down. Attach the supply line right here, and then by opening this valve and removing the top of the extractor right here, you can put a bag over the top of this, and by opening this valve again down here, just a little bit when you've got the supply line attached to here, just even finger tight, it will push the CO2 up through the filters in the bottom of the extractor, cleaning them, and also pushing the spent material out the top into your collection bag. This valve right here is an extract collection valve. You can collect extract along the way without depressurizing the entire system. This is the heater that is used to keep this column, the collection column, from freezing up and filling up with dry ice. This timer is basically the heartbeat of the system. It controls the valve, the solenoid valve that you can see there, in this valve right here. And this is what times the pulses and the overall system timing. This is the heart of the system. This is our recapture line. Again, I will show it to you from the front momentarily. And the CO2, which is now void of extract, is flowing back through this line into the recapture tank that is in the freezer. This is a silicone band heater that is controlled by one of these controllers here. And this is what controls the amount of heat that goes into the front end of the system. This band heater is wrapped around the supply tank to provide heat. This is a small 5 cubic foot Costco chest freezer. It was about $200. And it's got about 15 to 20 gallons of non-toxic plumbing antifreeze in it. That's the pink stuff that you see there, forming into slush. This is typically starting the process at around anywhere between minus 25 Celsius to minus 30 Celsius. And it will warm up to close to about 5 below Celsius by the time that the extraction is over, after all of the tank swaps. If you're going to do many more continuous runs, you will need a much larger freezer, or maybe 2 of these freezers. If you have 2 of these freezers, you will have 2 compressors, and that will give you a much larger cold sink. Alternatively, you could get a 15 cubic foot freezer and put about 40 gallons of antifreeze in it, and that will give you plenty of heat sink. Now, to give you an example of how you disconnect the tanks for swapping, essentially all you're going to do is close this valve right here. Okay, you're going to close this valve here, tighten it up like that, and then once you've done that, all you need to do, just loosen it off. See the pressure fall down to 0. Now all you've done is depressurize from here to here. That's all you've done. That's all the CO2 that you've lost in that swap. Okay, you do the same thing on the other side. You make sure that these valves are closed and these valves are closed, and that way you only lose a very small amount of CO2 when you're depressurizing and doing your swap. Once you have disconnected the full recapture tank, you basically are just going to lift it out of the freezer like this. Okay, and you can see the antifreeze will just drain off, and in just a moment, you could use a towel to wipe that off if you wish. Not really necessary because there's very little there. You can just wait till the drips are finished, and the tank will be ready for swapping. And here we have the system in its ready-to-run configuration. Now, I've run the hoses toward the front so that you can see them. Normally, they're hidden behind and run behind the freezer. And normally, the CO2 tank, the supply tank that you see there, the red tank, is off to the left, so you have full access to everything. But I wanted to put everything in frame so you can see just what's involved in it. Now, I'm going to run through the actual linear progression of how you start things. The first thing you need to do is get your freezer and antifreeze cold. You can see that there is slush formed there. So it's cold and it's running. This freezer will run this temperature down to around 25 below Celsius. The antifreeze that you see there is plumbing antifreeze, the same type that is used in RVs for winterizing purposes. It's non-toxic. It's absolutely nothing to worry about at all. If you spill some of it, you don't need to worry because it will just simply evaporate. Put your recapture tank in there. This is an empty tank to start. This will become full over the process. The second step, and this is after you've topped up your supply tank to around 47.5 pounds, anywhere between 46.5 and 48 is fine. Typically around 47 though. So you're going to top that up first, and then you're going to start the heat on it. Typically what I will do is I'll press the set button. I've got it set at 80 degrees here. That's far too hot for an extraction, but it's good enough to run up the pressure in the first place. You want to add as much heat as you can in order to build pressure as fast as you can. As soon as you get to the pressure that you want to get, now we're still running under 1,000 psi at this point in time, but when you get up to the pressure that you want to get, what you want to do is you want to press the set button and move this down to much lower. You'll typically be running starting at somewhere between 45 and 50 degrees centigrade with a 47-pound tank. So you can move it up and down and then set it, okay? So, but you'd only do that after you've already built your pressure to where you want it, which is typically somewhere between 1,100 and 1,300 psi. Then you can begin. But remember, do not set it to 80 degrees and then walk away, because if you run it up to 80 degrees on a 47-pound tank, you may find that you're going to overpressure. Now we've reached roughly 1,200 psi, and it's time to put the heat back down to where it should be. Step 3 is to pressurize the recapture line. The valve on the collector is closed. The pressure at this point is 0. The pressure relief valve is closed. we're going to open this valve here, like that, and we're going to turn the valve on, and this will pressurize the recapture line. Now we're going to go and see what back pressure is there. Now remember, this tank is cold and it has nothing in it, so there won't be very much in the way of back pressure at the beginning. What we have here is approximately 200 psi back pressure. I like to start at around 300 psi. I've set the heat back down to 45 degrees centigrade. This will back the pressure off a little bit, but it'll maintain itself right around here. Now we're ready to begin the process. We've opened up our recapture tank. It's cold in the freezer, and it's got a back pressure of about 200 psi. This is a good place to start. We're running around 1200 psi on the supply side, and the temperature has now been set back to 45 degrees. And as you can see, this is what's going on right now. It's fallen back to 45 degrees. It happens fairly quickly. So first thing you do is you open up this valve right here. This will pressurize the line. Now I'm not going to do this right now because this is a simulation and I don't have raw material in the extractor. But again, your freezer is cold, your back pressure is established, your supply tank pressure is established. You open the valve to pressurize the supply line. You go up to the top of the extractor. You open up this isolation valve right here. This will allow the CO2 to flow into the raw material that's in the extractor. You let it sit like that for a few minutes. This is the collector heat. You got to get it warm a little bit before we begin. And typically what happens is, in order to do that, is you just press this button. It begins, and it'll start to heat up. And it'll heat up pretty rapidly until it hits its set temperature, which in this case is at 50 degrees. But I'm going to move that set temperature up to, I'll just hold the button down and move it up to 65 degrees. Okay, set it. So now what's happening is everything is set and running. As soon as that happens, I'm going to hold this button down, shut it off, hold this button down, shut it off, hold this button down and release it, hold this button down and release it, hit it again to start it, hit it again to start it. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to start the timing cycle, because this is all timed and I want everything to be starting at the same place. So now the heat is there, everything is building into the right position, and we're ready to go. Press confirm, and that would start the timer, which will start the pulsing of this valve. At this point, when you get here and everything is done like that, after 2 pulses of this valve, you open this valve, and that will allow the pressure that's being built up in here because of these releases to flow into the recapture tank through this line. Once you've done that, remember, after 2 releases of this, you open this valve. That opens the entire circuit from supply tank through the extraction vessel, through the collector, into the recapture line, and into the recapture tank in the freezer. As soon as that happens, you can walk away. You don't need to be here for the next 2 hours because it's going to run, and at the end of that time, the supply tank down here will be empty, and the recapture tank in the freezer will be full, at which time you will swap those tanks and begin the process again. And that is what's involved in running the D16 extractor from Medxtractor.